Whispered tales of the Outer Rim before the Republic's golden age. Before hyperspace lanes carved order into the void, before the Senate spread its fingers across the stars, there were places untouched by law, untouched by light. Worlds spun cold and silent, forgotten by time, known only to those born beneath distant suns. These were the edges of the galaxy, the rim of known space, where silence had weight and stories moved faster than ships. There, in the stillness, they gathered. Clans, armored and weather-worn, shaped not by peace, but by the storm. They were not a single people, not yet. Just scattered warriors who knew the sound of battle before they learned the sound of their own names. Their leaders fought for honor, not empire. Their creed had no doctrine, only instinct. But over the decades, something began to take shape among them. Something harder than steel, older than pride. His name was Mandalore I, no throne, no crown, only a mask shaped like a T-shaped wound, and a voice that turned rivals into followers. He did not unite them with promises. He showed them what waited beyond their blood feuds, worthy enemies, rich in strength and strange in ways they had never known. Mandalore didn't build a kingdom, he summoned a war. They carved their homes into harsh terrain, planets of ash and salt, wind and rock, cold moons, dust-choked valleys, scorched plains, places where other civilizations would not settle. They turned the land itself into defense. Buried furnaces belched fire beneath their fortresses. Armories glowed like dying stars. Every child born was raised beside flame, steel, and silence. Their armor became sacred. Beskar, metal that could withstand blaster bolts, survive lightsaber strikes, forged in quiet, painted in the colors of grief, vengeance, and legacy. Each piece told a story. Each dent had a name. They didn't hide behind it. They became it. The Mandalorians had no desire for conquest. Conquest was too easy. They hunted what could strike back. They scoured the Outer Rim not for plunder, but for challenges. They tested themselves against beasts that swallowed walkers whole, against pirates who ruled black skies. When that wasn't enough, they turned to one another. Ritual combat, duels, trials. They thrived on struggle, not to rule, but to sharpen. But the galaxy was not silent forever. Through the haze of rumor and stardust, stories reached Mandalorian ears. Stories of beings in brown and cream robes who wielded fire from their hands and carried blades made of light. They were said to speak to unseen forces and move mountains with a whisper. They guarded ancient knowledge, defended peace, and bowed to no sovereign. The Jedi. The Mandalorians did not fear them. They were curious in the way wolves might study a lion. There was power in those tales, power that called to them, not because it was mystical, but because it resisted steel. And what resisted steel was, in their eyes, worth knowing. Scouts were sent, silent, disguised. They followed rumors past the deep core, through systems with names older than script, watching Jedi enclaves from shadows. What they saw disturbed and intrigued them. Discipline, control, restraint. The Jedi did not thirst for war, but they were ready for it. They were warriors of another kind, shaped by a code that bound their instincts. To the Mandalorians, that made them vulnerable, but also fascinating. Conflict did not erupt immediately. It began with observation, then disruption, then sabotage. Jedi missions to distant worlds found their supplies vanished, their ships disabled mid-orbit. They blamed pirates, then bandits. Then slowly they began to suspect something more deliberate. When the first Jedi and Mandalorian clashed, truly clashed, it was not in open war. It was on a forgotten moon. A knight investigating a temple ruin. a lone warrior hunting for relics. The duel was short, brutal. The Jedi survived, but barely. The warrior disappeared, wounded but not broken. Neither spoke of it upon returning, but both sides knew. The quiet had ended. Across Mandalorian space, fires were stoked in forge caverns. Across Jedi archives, old texts were dusted off. Mentions of the Taung people, of Mandalore's earliest raids, of battles buried beneath diplomatic memory. The Republic issued no formal recognition. The Jedi Order issued no declaration. But in the black between stars, preparations began. Mandalore I was long dead by then, but his mask remained, worn now by another, Mandalore the Uniter. He saw what was coming, and he welcomed it. The Jedi would not be conquered, but perhaps they could be broken. That was enough. The stars above their homeworlds grew tense. Traders whispered of strange fleet movements. Entire moons were evacuated without reason. Mining guilds vanished without distress calls. Jedi shadows stretched into regions once deemed too unstable to matter. In those distant systems, where maps ended and memory blurred, something ancient stirred awake. Not hatred, not vengeance, just the need to be tested again. The Mandalorians were ready. Their blades were sharpened, their armor sealed, their hearts silent, steady, and waiting. And in the distance, beneath the cold hush of hyperspace, a single lightsaber flickered to life. Skirmishes erupt in neutral systems, clashing ideologies, not resources. Jedi peacekeepers encounter Mandalorian raiding parties with unfamiliar armor and codes. The Force meets Beskar for the first time. Neither side understands the other's silence before combat. The stars begin to burn brighter in the wake of war. The first clashes didn't occur in battlefields. They unfolded in forgotten corners of the galaxy. Neutral systems where borders blurred and diplomacy held no sway. These were places too remote for the Senate to monitor, too unstable for treaties to matter. Systems like Shaldun's Reach, the Astu Belt, and the Rune Outlands. Here, trade lanes were lifelines, and small settlements were often left to fend for themselves. It began without warning. A shipment of medical supplies bound for a frontier colony vanished mid-route. No distress calls, no pirate claims, just silence. A week later, a communications outpost in the Adrasta Verge was reduced to slag. The few survivors reported dark armored figures descending from the sky, moving with precision, speaking no basic, and taking nothing but star maps and encrypted data cores. This wasn't plunder, it was scouting. The Jedi were dispatched as observers, peacekeepers, not soldiers. Masters and knights sent in pairs to investigate. Some returned with reports of organized raids, others never came back. One knight, drenched in dust and blood, recalled a skirmish in the plains of Pelgo Minor. His lightsaber, scored, flickering, had barely cut through the armor of the attackers. They weren't fighting to survive, he whispered to the council. They were testing us. The Jedi Order began compiling records, gathering symbols, markings, battle styles. The attackers wore no Republic insignia, spoke in guttural phrases, and bore the sign of a split crescent over a sun. They did not negotiate. They struck quickly without emotion, then vanished into the stars. The Jedi recognized the name at last. Mandalorians, a name from deep archives, a warlike culture once believed dispersed. But the Mandalorians hadn't vanished. They had grown quiet. In their silence, they had sharpened. It was on the storm-choked plains of Enaril IV that the first true confrontation occurred. A Jedi reconnaissance unit met a Mandalorian strike team face to face, beneath lightning and wind. There was no warning, no discussion, only the hum of sabers and the hiss of vibroblades. For the first time, the Force met Beskar. Blades of light skidded off chest plates that should have melted. Force pushers staggered warriors who did not fall. Mandalorian gauntlets fired whipcords and shock darts that rattled the reflexes of even seasoned Jedi. It wasn't brute strength, it was method. Every movement calculated, every strike timed. The Jedi relied on instincts. The Mandalorians relied on adaptation. One Jedi fell, another was wounded. The remaining defenders forced a retreat, not through strength, but through the terrain itself. They collapsed part of the ridgeline, separating the two forces. The Mandalorians didn't pursue. They had learned what they came to learn. The council convened in urgent silence. There were no official declarations of war, no cries for vengeance, but they knew. Something old had awoken in the Outer Rim, and it was looking for them. Meanwhile, the Mandalorians studied. Each skirmish was a forge, each loss a lesson. They documented Jedi techniques, telekinesis, heightened awareness, saber forms, not with reverence but with precision. Jedi patience, once admired, was now an exploitable rhythm. Their style had patterns. The Mandalorians began to map them. Word spread among the clans. Some dismissed the Jedi as mystics clinging to robes and codes. Others saw them as the perfect adversary, elusive, unyielding, potent. Clans that had not united in generations began aligning under a single purpose: learn how the Jedi fight, and show them how Mandalorians endure. In the sector of Vendaxa, a Republic diplomat shuttle was intercepted. The crew was left untouched. But the diplomatic data, coordinates of Jedi enclaves, schedules, off-world rituals, was taken. The message was subtle. The Mandalorians were watching. They knew where to look now. Soon, Jedi patrols were rerouted. Outer temple bastions reinforced. Still, it wasn't enough. The Mandalorians had no front lines, no supply chains to sever, no political leaders to pressure. Just clans, scattered and nomadic, moving like whispers. Jedi strategy, built around containment and resolution, faltered against an enemy with no centralized weakness. In time, small Republic outposts began going dark. Some the Jedi reached in time to protect. Others they found still smoking, craters still warm. Lightsaber scorch marks mixed with flamethrower residue. The battlefield told no lies. The Mandalorians didn't fight for control. They fought to leave a mark. The Jedi debated internally. Some masters called for restraint, dialogue, patience, observation. Others began to train in older, more aggressive saber forms. Young knights requested field deployments. Students asked about Mandalore I, a name now repeated in low voices beneath the spires of the temple. The Order hadn't faced an enemy like this in centuries. The spark had caught. Not a blaze, but an ember that refused to die. It settled in the cracks of the galaxy, waiting for the right breath of wind. Above the world of Sereno, beneath the dying glow of a crimson star, another Jedi scout ship vanished. It would not be the last. A war-torn world becomes the crucible for Mandalorian siegecraft. Jedi defiance turns into strategy. They adapt, but so do the Mandalorians. Force powers unravel against guerrilla warfare and flame projectors. The cost, a fractured surface and a deeper rift between orders. Iridonia was no jewel. It was a fractured world of obsidian cliffs and lightning-raked deserts, home to the Zabrak, fierce, defiant, bred for survival. The planet had seen its share of turmoil before the Mandalorians arrived. Civil wars, clan feuds, harsh ecosystems. But when the siege began, Iridonia became something else entirely, a proving ground. The Mandalorians did not come in fleets. They landed in waves, small, precise, coordinated. They did not announce their presence. They simply began. Cities fell into silence one by one. Communication hubs were severed, weather towers sabotaged, supply lines reduced to smoldering trails. The Zabrak resisted, of course. They were no strangers to battle. But the Mandalorians didn't fight in the open. They melted into caverns, ravines, and the shadows of their own destruction. They weren't occupying. They were bleeding the planet dry. The Jedi response was measured, cautious. 4 Masters and 12 Knights were deployed alongside Republic relief units. Their mission was containment and civilian protection. But when they arrived, they found no enemy lines, no fixed positions, only smoke and silence. The Mandalorians had already burrowed deep. Iridonia's surface was deceptive, jagged above, hollow beneath. Natural tunnels crisscrossed beneath the rock, and the Mandalorians adapted quickly. They built subterranean bunkers reinforced with shield plating, deploying mobile flame projectors through vents and fissures. Jedi accustomed to open duels found themselves navigating darkness, dodging mines and pushing through smoke-choked corridors. One night, Tay Relin described it as fighting ghosts in a furnace. His lightsaber burned hot, but the air around him burned hotter. They were trained to sense minds and intentions. But in the tunnels, even the Force felt muffled, shrouded by heat, metal, and shifting walls. Meditation faltered. Reflex gave way to exhaustion. The Mandalorians pressed harder. They used misdirection with brutal efficiency, sound traps that mimicked movement, false transmissions echoing Jedi distress codes, decoy armor mounted on droids. Jedi teams were drawn into ambushes again and again. Even the most skilled masters found their techniques tested. A force push meant little when a Mandalorian jet trooper attacked from above, flanked by incendiary drones from below. But the Jedi were not passive. They began to adapt. They moved in smaller units. They relied less on saber forms and more on environmental manipulation, collapsing tunnels to cut off escape routes, redirecting geysers to flush enemy holdouts, using the natural electromagnetic fields of the planet to disrupt Mandalorian comms. Zabrak natives joined their efforts, guiding them through forgotten crevices and long-sealed escape paths. The order shifted from defense to strategy. Master Varu Tan, an aging Zabrak herself, became the center of resistance in the Northern Hemisphere. Her command outpost, cut directly into a basalt mesa, served as a staging ground for counterattacks. Her calm was unwavering, but even she acknowledged the change. This is not war. This is a hunt, and they want us to feel like prey. For weeks, the siege wore on. Fires spread across plateaus once home to nomadic tribes. Cities became battlegrounds, then ruins, then graves. The Mandalorians didn't seek to control Iridonia. They sought to humiliate it. The Jedi defended every structure, every cliffside, every civilian convoy. But for every step forward, 2 others slipped into shadow. At the height of the siege, the Mandalorians launched a direct assault on the southern temple complex. It was a place of meditation, not war. Healers, archivists, younglings in training. They came at night, under cloud cover, breaching the walls with charges set days earlier. Jedi defenders rallied fast, but the attackers were relentless. Flame projectors breached the halls. Walls melted. Statues toppled. Master Bren Kodo fell defending the archives, crushed under collapsed stone after shielding 6 initiates with his body. Holocrons were lost, shattered or incinerated. Force relics, older than the Republic itself, reduced to slag. That night marked a turning point. The Jedi began to feel something they rarely admitted aloud: hatred. But hatred was dangerous. It clouded their path, and they knew it. So they leaned into discipline, into the code, into each other. Their unity, shaken, began to harden again, not out of superiority, but necessity. The Mandalorians had not expected that. Eventually, Iridonia stood scarred but unbroken. The Mandalorians withdrew, not defeated but satisfied. They had tested Jedi resolve, measured it, learned from it. They left behind burned cities and bitter memories. The Jedi buried their dead beneath black stone, the names carved with care. But it wasn't just the ground that was fractured. Trust between the Order and the Senate strained. Local systems questioned the Republic's reach, and among the Jedi themselves debates flared, quiet but fierce, about how long they could fight a war without becoming part of it. In Iridonia's sky, ash still drifted months after the siege ended, not from fires, from memory. Mandalorians unleash their shadow legions across lightless voids. Planets fall not to strength, but silence, precision, and fear. Jedi archives begin documenting their enemy, but knowledge is already outdated. Whispers of an unnamed Jedi tactician who vanishes after one victory too many. The war spreads like smoke, seen only when it chokes. There are wars fought in daylight, honor-bound clashes between fleets, lines drawn and followed, victories marked by banners and recorded in ceremony. Then there are the other wars, the ones without front lines, the ones that whisper then scream, the ones that leave no declarations, only the silence after transmission cuts. This was the season of shadow. After Iridonia, the Mandalorians changed tactics. They ceased siegecraft, ceased open engagements. What followed was not retreat, but evolution. A quiet campaign that would come to be known only much later as the Shadow Crusades. The Jedi, scholars of battle history, had no name for what was happening at first. There were no full invasions, no battle stations, just disappearance. Entire settlements blinked out, no smoke, no fire, no signs of conflict. Droids found food left uneaten, air scrubbers still cycling, doors ajar as if the inhabitants had stepped out and simply never returned. The first planet to vanish was Tenevar, then Boris Prime, then Reaxor 4. The pattern emerged slowly, because the pattern hid itself deliberately. These were not major systems, no strategic value, no military presence, but they were watch points, places where Jedi had once walked, places where the Republic's maps ended in ellipses. They were chosen for what they saw, not what they held. The Mandalorians had formed strike groups with a new purpose. Not conquest, not glory. Surveillance, removal, psychological unraveling. These were the Shadow Legions, units that operated in near-total silence. They traveled in stealth-capable frigates, black as vacuum, moving between systems that didn't show up on Republic star maps. They planted listening towers on asteroid belts, cloaked satellites that intercepted Jedi chatter. Observation first, elimination later. By the time Jedi analysts realized what was happening, 5 more systems had gone dark. Not all wiped out. Some were left intact, but altered. Temples looted, archives stripped, Jedi statues shattered or reassembled into grotesque totems. The message wasn't just strategic, it was personal. The Council responded with new measures. Knights were paired with intelligence units, their missions shrouded even from other Jedi. The archives began to document Mandalorian methods, patterns, weapons. But the Mandalorians were already ahead. Each encounter revealed new tactics, disguises, mimicked distress signals, carbon smoke that dulled force sensitivity. They didn't just study Jedi combat styles, they studied Jedi thinking. One Jedi archivist wrote in his logs, "They read us like scripts. Our calm, our mercy, our movements. They don't hate it, they use it." In this deepening storm, One figure emerged. A Jedi tactician. His name never entered the public records. By the time whispers reached the temple, his victories had already spread. He coordinated a series of ambushes across the Indrek Spur, drawing Mandalorian squads into false retreats and collapsing them with seismic charges. His methods were clinical, swift, and brutal. Not un-Jedi, but close. He knew how they moved, how they breathed, how to cut off their escape before the thought reached their minds. He became a phantom to the Mandalorians. Something close to respect grew among the warriors who had encountered him and survived. But just as quickly as he appeared, he vanished. No body was found. No transmission received. The council issued no statement. Some said he was taken. Others said he walked into the void. Mission complete. But the battles changed after that. The Jedi became more careful, more deliberate. A part of their certainty had gone quiet. Meanwhile, the war slipped further from public knowledge. The Republic's attention, bound by politics and expansion treaties, turned elsewhere. To them, the Jedi were containing a border conflict. To the Jedi, the Republic had already forgotten how to listen, and so the war spread in waves, not large, just constant. On Ybarra, every member of a planetary militia was found in their sleep chambers, unharmed yet unconscious for over 30 hours. Their entire defense grid had been extracted during that time, its core reactor missing. On Dromi Fel, Jedi arrived to find strange sigils scorched into the tundra, Mandalorian clan runes, rearranged into a language the Order didn't recognize. And on Anaxes Minor, a Jedi learner activated his lightsaber for a routine training exercise. It exploded in his hand. The weapon had been subtly tampered with. There had been no signs of entry, no trace of who had done it. But the message was clear. The Shadow Crusades were not about territory. They were about knowing, about reminding the Jedi that their order was no longer immune to war's oldest tools: surprise, silence, and fear. The Jedi continued their patrols, but they walked differently now, shoulders tense, senses stretched thin. Trust came slower, and when they meditated, they often reached for something solid, stone, sand, or steel, just to remind themselves they were still grounded. Above the galactic disk, in the black between systems, shadow legions moved like smoke through fingers, and by the time they were seen, truly seen, it was already too late. The first large-scale clash of full Jedi battalions versus Mandalorian war hosts. Lightsabers ignite in freezing vacuum, reflected in shattered visor glass. Mandalorians weaponize the terrain, turning nature into ally. Jedi lose more than warriors, they lose certainty. A stalemate leaves only scars, drifting wreckage, and silence. Galidraan's moon was lifeless. No cities, no forests, just fractured stone and glittering ice under an ever-fading star. Its surface cracked under centuries of frost and impact craters, a graveyard of forgotten meteors and metallic whispers. It wasn't a world anyone sought, until the Mandalorians claimed it. They didn't announce their presence. They arrived in phases, silent, deliberate. Ships embedded into the crust like iron scars. Tunnels carved with plasma drills. Surface bunkers disguised as natural formations. The moon became a fortress, sculpted to their will. Not for defense, for challenge. They wanted the Jedi to come. And the Jedi did come. The Order assembled a full deployment, 3 battalions drawn from different enclaves, led by a High Council member and 5 battlefield tacticians. The mission was clear. This would be the first unified strike. A demonstration of the Order's resolve. A message to the galaxy that the Jedi did not fear Mandalorian escalation. From orbit, the landing began. Transport cruisers descended in diamond formation, flanked by atmospheric escorts and shield generators. The moment the landing feet touched soil, the battle began. Not from the front, but from below. Mandalorians burst from ice fissures, firing explosive bolts and thermal charges. Jetpacks carved arcs in the freezing air, targeting Jedi in mid-descent. Shock mines detonated in pre-marked zones. The moon had been rigged for war, and the Jedi had stepped onto a stage already set. Still, they adapted. Lightsabers ignited one after another, blue and green and gold piercing the dim. The crack of ignited plasma met the hiss of frigid wind. Jedi formed defensive circles, coordinating movement through the Force, pushing back against the ambush. They moved in waves, some lifting debris to shield fallen comrades, others leaping into the chaos to drive a wedge between the enemy ranks. But nothing held still. The moon's gravity was uneven, pulsing with magnetic anomalies left over from ancient collisions. The Mandalorians knew every inch of it. They used the terrain as a partner, led Jedi into low-grav traps, where footing failed and jumps carried too far. Some were pushed off ledges with a casual shove. Others were caught in vacuum pockets where airlocks slammed shut and pressure suits failed. One Jedi Knight, Sen Torul, was last seen reaching for his saber mid-fall before he was pulled out of sight into a cavern crack that collapsed moments later. The High Council member, Master Dorek Halrun, remained calm throughout. He anchored the central command near the northern crater ridge, coordinating squads through meditation-linked force relays. Under his leadership they gained ground, slowly, one ravine at a time. A turning point came during the third rotation, as nightfall deepened the cold. The Jedi deployed seismic stabilizers to crack the ice fields where Mandalorian gunships had hidden. The ground split, forcing war hosts into open air. For the first time, the Jedi pressed the advantage, sabers flashing through snow, force waves bending the very wind around them. Mandalorian warriors fell, but they fell on their feet, weapons in hand. A brutal duel unfolded near the moon's pole, Master Halrun versus a Mandalorian commander known only as Vesk. No words were exchanged, only motion. Sparks and frost clashed in silence. Halrun's saber marked Vesk's armor but never pierced it. Vesk's warhammer cracked the Jedi's shoulder, but not his focus. When both were pulled apart by orbital tremors, neither was dead, but neither stood whole again. As the sun crept across the horizon's edge, both sides began to retreat, not from defeat, from exhaustion, from calculation. The Mandalorians pulled back into their buried strongholds, cloaked once more by rock and ice. The Jedi regrouped at their landing sites, recovering wounded, sealing body bags with muted reverence. The battle had no victor, no triumph, just loss. Over 200 Jedi had entered the conflict. 60 would not return. The Mandalorian casualties were higher, by design. They valued death with purpose, and each fallen warrior was already replaced by the next who had watched, learned, and sharpened for the next assault. After the conflict, the Jedi removed nothing from the moon. No prisoners, no banners, just data logs, fractured equipment, and one broken lightsaber hilt recovered from the snow. In the council chamber, silence lingered longer than usual, not from fear, but from something deeper, a recognition. This war would not end with declarations, or negotiations, or a single overwhelming blow. It would continue, in ice, in shadow, in places the light struggled to reach, and Galidraan's moon remained, unclaimed, scarred, silent. Mandalorians forged new tactics from defeat, honor redefined through adaptation. Jetpacks, flame gauntlets, and anti-force tech rise from Mandal Motors laboratories. Jedi struggle with internal dogma, how to fight warriors who do not yield to persuasion or peace. The council divides quietly. Not all Jedi agree on the path forward. Galidraan's moon had not been a failure. It had been an education. Losses were studied, not mourned. On the return to Mandalorian space, the survivors met not with blame, but with architects, armorers, and warsmiths. In the caverns beneath the capital moons, warriors removed their helmets not for grief, but for re-engineering. They laid out scorched plates, shattered gauntlets, disrupted visors. Every mark was analyzed, every weakness dissected. Mandalore the Uniter decreed, no warrior would wear the same armor twice. To fall and rise in the same shell was stagnation. What endured must evolve. From this came the reforging. Workshops under Mandal Motors, once known for starfighter hulls and orbital construction, shifted their focus. Not to build fleets, to build solutions. Force-resistant shielding, anti-gravity mobility, modular systems designed to change mid-combat, jetpacks refined for quiet thrust, gauntlets enhanced with short-range flamethrowers, and liquid taint dispersers to confuse Jedi senses. Every loss was poured into the mold of something sharper, and then came the null blades. Forged with obsidian-flecked cortosis, these were not meant to kill Jedi, but to disrupt them. A single strike could short out a saber for moments long enough for a second warrior to deliver a blow. The Jedi had always fought under the assumption that their sabers defined the rules. The Mandalorians had decided otherwise. In subterranean war halls, hollow recordings of Jedi movements were slowed to fractions. Padawan footwork analyzed, master parries dissected. From this came counterforms, unorthodox, aggressive, deliberately chaotic. Mandalorians began training in combat rhythms designed to throw Jedi off balance, to make them second-guess their own traditions. None of this was seen as dishonor. For the Mandalorians, adaptation was survival. Honor was not in rigidity. It was in overcoming the odds with whatever tools one could wield. The enemy was fluid. Therefore, the warrior must become vapor and strike like flame. To win without learning was considered failure. Back in the core, the Jedi Order did not change as swiftly. Council chambers buzzed with reports from Galidraan and Iridonia. Losses weighed against principles. One master warned that the Mandalorians were not a species, they were a mindset. They do not need numbers, they need time. Another, more reserved, questioned whether the Jedi were losing sight of their own path. We are defenders, not executioners. This debate didn't erupt, it eroded, quietly, persistently. Some Jedi began modifying their roles, employing sensor disruptors and surveillance grids typically reserved for Republic scouts. Others trained in more aggressive saber forms, long discouraged within temple halls. Form 7, the unpredictable and volatile style, saw renewed interest. Its practitioners claimed it met Mandalorian speed with necessary fury, but others warned against its toll. The Force was harmony. Anger, even channeled, risked imbalance. Younglings noticed. Lessons once centered on peacekeeping began to shift subtly. Case studies now included battlefield scenarios. In meditation halls, the silence grew heavier, as if even the walls sensed the conflict seeping inward. A rift did not form loudly. It formed in looks, in pauses before answers, in questions left unanswered. One council member reportedly refused to authorize any more mass deployments. "If they wish to draw us into a trap," she said, "they are succeeding." Another replied, "And if we retreat too long, we surrender the outer rim." The Jedi Code, once a fixed compass, had begun to feel like a set of verses spoken underwater, clear in the temple, distorted beyond it. Some Jedi requested assignments nearer to Coruscant, not from fear, but from doubt. doubt in the path ahead. Others requested the opposite: field duty, combat rotations. They wanted to be out there, where the decisions felt real, where the war spoke plainly. In the quiet between campaigns, memorials were held. Jedi who fell at Galidraan were honored with words that rang hollow to some. "They fought for peace," said one speaker. "But peace did not fight with them," whispered another. Meanwhile, across Mandalorian space, war chants evolved. Old songs reworded. Victories sang not of conquest, but adaptation, of warriors reborn through challenge. Young Mandalorians were told of Jedi who flinched in battle, whose calm broke under relentless assault. Whether true or not didn't matter. The myth was already louder than the facts. And still, neither side relented. They watched, they listened, they prepared. War had not ended. It had simply changed shape, and both orders, warrior and monk, were no longer who they were when it began. Concord Dawn was never the strongest Mandalorian world. It didn't boast fortress cities or deep weapon foundries like the old homeworld. It didn't forge warriors from birth, nor did it sing the loudest during war celebrations, but it held weight, in lineage, in bloodlines, in stories whispered in armor-clad homes. It was a place of farmers, pilots, veterans who had laid their weapons down to raise children in red clay and yellow sun, which made its fall all the more bitter. The Republic claimed it was an accident of escalation, an intelligence error, a misfire in coordination between Fleet Command and planetary sensors. But those words meant nothing to the people who watched their skies split open in flame. It began with a strike. One Republic warship operating under assumed Mandalorian targeting data engaged a civilian trade convoy suspected of smuggling weapons. The ships were slow, unarmed, transporting food and medicine. When they didn't respond to hails, interference blamed on local solar storms, the warship opened fire. 4 freighters were destroyed. Debris fell in arcs over the nearby hemisphere. Within hours, retaliation came. A Mandalorian patrol unit engaged the warship with precision strikes, disabling its propulsion and capturing the surviving crew. No prisoners were harmed. The Republic demanded their immediate return. The clans refused. In response, the Republic authorized a blockade of the system. They didn't call it a siege, but it became one. Relief routes were cut. Trade was halted. Communications throttled. Then came the bombardments. Surgical, the briefing said. Targeted. But no bombardment ever leaves only the target wounded. Entire villages were caught in the crossfire. Agricultural domes were flattened. Fields turned to ash. Concord Dawn, once vibrant, began to smoke, and the smoke spread farther than anyone could measure. The Jedi were not on the ground when it happened. They had not given the orders. Yet in every Mandalorian camp, it was their name that was spoken with clenched teeth. To the clans, there was no separation. Jedi sat beside senators. Jedi protected Republic worlds. Jedi flew with Republic insignia. If the Republic acted, it was because the Jedi permitted it. And in truth, some Jedi had remained silent, too silent. On a ridge above the plains of Horak Vale, a child stood beside the wreckage of their home. Their family's dome had taken a direct strike, no warning. The child survived because they'd been out chasing a training droid across the eastern gulch. Hours later, they returned to silence. No screams, just crackling metal. They didn't cry. They watched. That child would grow, and they would remember. Not just the faces they lost, but the colors they saw. Republic red, Jedi silver, the sharp blue flash of Republic bombardment across a green sky. They would carry those colors behind their eyes until the end of their life. They would become Mandalore, and the fire would never leave them. Back in the core, news of Concord Dawn's devastation reached the Council in fragmented dispatches. Some masters demanded immediate intervention. Others cautioned neutrality, fearing that further Jedi involvement would deepen the perception of guilt. The Council debated through layers of unease, bound by duty, paralyzed by politics. A decision was eventually reached. Offer mediation, send envoys, restore balance. But the Mandalorians did not answer. They didn't want balance. They wanted memory honored, and blood answered with blood. Within weeks, new symbols emerged across Mandalorian armor. The sigil of Concord Dawn, a rising moon over twin blades, was etched beside clan emblems, not as mourning, as promise. War songs were rewritten. Young warriors recited new verses before battle, swearing oaths to the fallen of Dawn. Mandalorian raids intensified, not larger, but sharper. They no longer struck only at Jedi operations. They began targeting Republic diplomatic lines, relief convoys, even neutral systems aligned with the Senate. The rules had shifted. This was no longer strategy. This was response, personal, charged, relentless. The Jedi found themselves boxed in. To stay neutral was to be complicit. To act was to be blamed. They issued statements, dispatched investigators, offered aid. None of it mattered. The Mandalorians had made their decision. The Jedi would answer for Concord Dawn. Even within the Order, the incident left scars. Younger knights questioned the Republic's motives. Some whispered that Jedi had become shields for an empire too blind to see its own reflection. Others doubled down, reaffirming their loyalty to the Council. But no one left that debate unchanged. From the ashes of a quiet farming world, the war gained a new rhythm. No longer dictated by councils or codes, but by memory and grief, and the way a child looks at fire and decides to become it. A rare armistice, fleeting, uneasy. Both sides recover, reforge, remember. A group of Jedi attempt diplomacy. Only one returns. Mandalorians construct monuments not to victory, but to the warriors who never kneeled. Jedi sculpt temples with new walls, higher, thicker. There was no treaty, no handshake across battlefields, only a pause. After the fall of Concord Dawn, both sides pulled back, not from peace but from exhaustion. The Jedi called it a reorganization, the Mandalorians a sharpening. Across war-torn systems, the stars seemed to breathe again. Merchant routes reopened cautiously. Frontier stations flickered back to life, but no one believed the quiet would last. This was not peace. It was the eye of a storm. The Jedi used the silence to retreat into thought. On Ossus, within the crystalline chambers of the Great Library, masters gathered for reflection. They revised battle doctrines, updated archival entries with the names of the fallen, and debated in whispers behind temple walls. Some believed the Force had guided the lull. Others called it a trap in slow motion. Temples across the Outer Rim were fortified. Meditation halls were reinforced with Frick support beams. Observation towers grew taller, not for beauty, but for warning. Initiates trained under harsher regimes. Lightsaber forms once reserved for rare duels were introduced to Padawan drills. The air within the Order grew heavier. Even silence felt rehearsed. Still, hope found a crack. In the shadow of the broken moon of Var, 5 Jedi set out, envoys, not warriors. Their purpose was diplomacy. The Council selected them with care. No firebrands, no idealists, only calm, experienced minds. They carried no war maps, only words. The Mandalorians did not answer the invitation, but neither did they strike the vessel from orbit. It was enough. They landed on a bare plateau near the ruins of an old Mandalorian stronghold, abandoned since the earliest Crusades. The wind there didn't howl, it rasped, carried with it a dry, metallic scent. For 3 days, the Jedi waited. On the 4th, they were met. A single Mandalorian entered the camp. No escort, no armor. A simple tunic, worn at the sleeves. His voice was low, his tone even. He asked them to walk. They did, over cracked stone, past the remnants of training circles marked by faded clan symbols. He spoke little, and they asked less. When they returned to the camp, he left behind a message carved into iron. It read, "Honor stands when the war rests." Only one Jedi returned to Ossus. The others stayed behind, by choice or by consequence no one could say. The survivor never revealed what passed in those final hours, only that they'd been treated not as enemies, but as guests of warriors who remembered every face they'd lost. Far across Mandalorian space, the forge world of Harkund roared back to life. But it did not ring with preparation for battle. Instead, warsmiths and clan shapers began crafting monuments, not to victory, to resilience. Walls lined with engraved plates, each bearing the name of a fallen warrior, not just from the current war, but from centuries past. Some bore no names at all, only the sigil of the clan they served. These were the nameless dead, warriors whose sacrifice was known only to the battlefield. Atop one mesa, a statue was raised, not tall, not grand, but enduring. A warrior without a weapon, kneeling beside the remains of their opponent, not in defeat, in recognition. A ritual of remembrance, not conquest. Fires were lit at its base each night and clans told stories, not of how battles were won, but of how warriors were changed by them. Still, for every act of reflection, there remained bitterness. Children who had grown up beneath bombardment now sparred harder, faster. They asked not how to avoid the Jedi, but how to pierce their calm. Weaponsmiths engineered new armor variants tailored specifically to resist force-assisted strikes. Entire battle groups began training blindfolded, simulating combat without sight or sound, preparing for encounters where the Force could mislead. Even in armistice, preparation thrived, and the Jedi too learned. They built higher walls not to shield from fire, but from doubt. The temples became quieter, not with peace, but with watchfulness. Statues of past Jedi Masters were moved indoors. Vulnerable, said some. Too open. Even stone could be broken now. One Padawan whispered during a training session, "We're building fortresses inside ourselves." Her master did not disagree. This was not the end of war. It was a breath between sentences, a brief stillness before the next motion. Neither side claimed ground nor offered surrender, but both remembered, both reforged, and in the silence between strategy and story, they prepared. Not for victory, not for peace, but for the moment, the quiet would crack. Kiros was a quiet moon, forested, temperate, serene. It orbited a pale white gas giant and floated far from major lanes, unremarkable to most, but chosen carefully by the Jedi for precisely that reason, a place of healing, meditation, study. The enclave built there was small, just over 20 Jedi in residence, most of them teachers, healers, and initiates not yet ready for the front lines. They didn't keep heavy defenses. They didn't expect an attack. And when the sun rose after the longest night in Kiros' brief history, there was no one left to explain what had happened. The distress beacon activated automatically at dawn. The signal reached the Ossus outpost 3 hours later. No message, just an alert. Standard procedure, no urgency. But something in the frequency was wrong. Too quiet, too clean. By the time the retrieval shuttle arrived, the Enclave stood untouched. No blast marks, no structural damage. The front gates remained sealed. No signs of forced entry, but it was empty. Every room, every corridor. No heat signatures, no transmissions, no living presence at all. They found robes, boots, training sabers, meals half-eaten, a kettle still warm, but no bodies. It wasn't abandonment. That would have left signs of struggle, some resistance, some hurried escape. There was none. It was as though the occupants had simply ceased, not escaped, not fled, disappeared. The council convened within the day. Reports poured in, analysis, scans, hypotheses. None offered certainty. The Mandalorians were the first to be blamed. Too convenient, too perfect. But they denied involvement. Flatly, publicly. Clan leaders released a joint statement. We honor warriors. We do not unmake shadows. If we strike, we leave scars. And for once, their tone rang true. There was no evidence of their presence. No Beskar, no sigils, no heat flares in orbit, no trace, which made it worse. Within the Order, paranoia bloomed, not loud, not in anger, quietly, in glances, in paused sentences. Masters questioned surveillance systems, recalibrated droid monitors, doubled the shielding of their data vaults. Even the Jedi Temple on Coruscant tightened its access protocols. Gatekeepers, security levels, code phrases. Jedi were asked to update their emergency contact chains. A precaution, nothing more, but it left a mark. The idea took hold. Someone had entered without being seen. And worse, someone might do it again. The Jedi had faced war, faced overwhelming odds. But this was something else. This was absence as weapon. It unbalanced the mind. How do you defend against what leaves no trace? How do you guard a sanctuary from vanishing? On Kiros, a team of archivists and knights began a longer investigation. They camped outside the Enclave, refusing to enter the main structure until protocols were rewritten. Droids sent in first. Sensors swept the walls. Eventually, the search turned inward. In the sub-levels beneath the central chamber, they found one thing. A single lightsaber, active, humming in place, floating mid-air, not balanced on stone, not held, hovering. Its owner was never identified. The crystal inside had been shifted, tuned to a frequency none of the scholars recognized. When they deactivated it, it flickered once, then went silent forever. The saber was sealed in a containment vault beneath Ossus. No conclusions were ever announced. The Mandalorians moved on. Their war hosts remained active, but for weeks after Kiros, they avoided Jedi systems entirely. Some believed it was coincidence. Others thought it was respect, or perhaps wariness. Even warriors don't charge toward the unexplained. Back in the temple, teachings changed. Younglings once taught to trust the Force without question were now warned of its silence. Not fear, never that, but caution, that some things move outside the light, not against it, simply beyond it. The Force was still their ally, but they had learned not all allies speak when spoken to. From that point on, every Jedi enclave across the Outer Rim posted sentinels, not just guards, watchers. Jedi trained to notice small patterns, energy fluctuations, unfamiliar rhythms in the Force. A new branch of study emerged, pattern scribes. They listened to silence the way others listened to voices. But no pattern ever matched Kiros. The Enclave was not rebuilt. The moon was sealed by Jedi decree. No landings authorized. No investigations reopened. Only one satellite remains in orbit. A passive beacon transmitting a single phrase in ancient High Galactic. We remember. To this day, no one claims responsibility. And when Jedi speak of the night of Kiros, they lower their voices, not from fear, from reverence, because something walked beneath those trees, and it did not leave footprints, only cold. There had been whispers of a final campaign, one last push that would turn the tide, not a peace talk, not a ceasefire, a storm. Both sides sensed it coming, not through intelligence or strategy, but through the way the Force slowed around them, the way warriors stared longer at their helmets before putting them on, the way even the wind began to wait. It began on the fractured world of Arda 7, a planet choked in tectonic unrest and deep magnetic fields. Once a mining colony, it had been abandoned decades before the war began, deemed too unstable for habitation. That made it perfect. It was neutral, isolated, no cities to shield, no civilians to protect, just earth and stone and the weight of destiny. Mandalorian war hosts descended first. Dozens of clans aligned for the first time in years under a single war banner. At their head, Mandalore-Jareth Krul, a towering figure in black and crimson Beskar. He carried no blaster, only a great hammer forged from the spine of a starship hull. He spoke little, but when he did, the clans listened. The Jedi followed, 3 full contingents, led by Council Master Syrian Hal and flanked by some of the Order's finest tacticians. Each knight carried more than a lightsaber. They carried the burden of years, losses, victories that hadn't felt like victories, names they no longer spoke aloud. There was no prelude, no call to parley, only the silence before weapons were drawn. The sky above Arda 7 lit with atmospheric discharges. Ion storms raged without pattern, splitting the clouds in blinding arcs. And beneath that chaos, 2 philosophies met one last time. Blades and hammers, the Force and fire, precision and fury. The ground cracked, not from bombs but from the sheer volume of movement, hundreds of bodies crashing into one another across miles of jagged stone. Lightsabers hissed and clashed, cutting through mist and smoke. Mandalorian gauntlets flared, discharging compressed plasma and sonic bursts that rattled bone. Droids deployed from high-altitude drops, striking like comets, only to be shredded by coordinated Jedi counteroffensives. No battle map could track it all. Lines dissolved within minutes. Factions broke and reformed mid-fight. Jedi fought beside strangers. Mandalorians bled beside rivals. Rank meant nothing. Only motion mattered. Survive, move, strike, breathe. Names were lost almost immediately. The fighting blurred identities. You didn't see the color of a clan, the rank of a master. You saw motion and tried to keep it from stopping your heart. And still, neither side broke. Mandalore-Jareth Krul faced Master Hal beneath the shadow of a ruptured mesa. Neither had backup. Their duel lasted nearly an hour. Not because they held back, but because they understood one another perfectly. Each move countered not by reflex, but recognition. When Jareth finally fell, it wasn't to a saber. It was the collapse of the ground beneath his feet. The planet itself seemed to choose the ending. The crater swallowed him. His warhammer still burned when it vanished into the depths. Master Hal didn't live to report it. A poisoned blade had cut his side earlier in the battle. He'd ignored it. Too much depended on that last stand. He died kneeling, watching the void close over his opponent. Elsewhere, a Jedi temple off-world flickered. The beacon of Cirrus IV, a remote sanctuary for archives and initiates, went dark. No ships approached, no weapons fired. But when communications resumed hours later, the great dome was cracked. Holocrons shattered. A knowledge vault lost forever. It was never determined if the Mandalorians had struck it, or if the Force itself had recoiled from what was unfolding. By the third day, the battle had no more shape, only survivors. Some Jedi wandered without sabers. Some Mandalorians dropped their helmets and walked into the dust, saying nothing. No side declared victory, no one asked. When the fleets returned to orbit, they took who they could, wounded, shell-shocked. Few spoke on the way home. Even fewer ever returned to the battlefield. In the years that followed, the war stuttered. Skirmishes continued, but the hunger had faded. The drive that once pushed both orders toward escalation had burned itself out. Something had broken on Arda 7, not just bodies, something older, something in the will of both sides. The Jedi rebuilt, slowly, thoughtfully. The Council became more guarded, less public. Their reach shortened, not from weakness, but from the wisdom of loss. The Mandalorians returned to their moons. Some clans dissolved, others hardened, forging new codes in the memory of the dead. Jareth Krul's name was never claimed by another. His mask was never found, and the galaxy moved on. Trade resumed. Stars turned. But in the outer regions, where Arda 7 still drifted in silence, ships rarely passed. They say the planet still shakes, not from fault lines, from memory. Vizsla's name is not often spoken aloud. It does not belong to peace or war, nor does it fit cleanly into the lines of Jedi record or Mandalorian saga. His story floats between archives and fireside chants, half remembered, half denied, never fully accepted by either side. But it begins, like most such stories, with a child. Born during the final embers of conflict, Tara came into a galaxy split by silence. His clan had fought, some said too fiercely, on worlds now abandoned. His parents, warriors by right, vanished when he was still small. Some say they died in battle. Others claim they handed him over willingly. The truth, like most things surrounding Tara, is blurred. He was discovered by a Jedi Knight on the rain-slicked plateaus of Concordia, alone, but not afraid. The Force pulsed around him, not wild, but watchful. There was no test, no negotiation. The Knight took him to the temple and the Council accepted him. He was raised beneath spires instead of stars, fed on code and calm, taught to silence what stirred inside him. But the stirrings never faded. Tara did not fight the training. He excelled in it. He memorized the forms. He recited the code before others could read it aloud. His lightsaber technique was refined, decisive, never wasted. His meditation lasted longer than the Masters required. His silence, though, was different. It wasn't discipline, it was distance. He never quite belonged. The robes never felt like his. He wore them, but never with ease. He listened, but never echoed what was spoken. He followed the Jedi path, but somewhere, quietly, he followed another as well. Something in his blood called him backward, even as the Order pulled him forward. In the archives, he studied more than Jedi history. He asked questions about Mandalore, about armor, about weapons, about war. Some masters indulged his curiosity, others warned him of attachment. "The past is a weight, Padawan," one said. Tara had only nodded. But he did not forget. When he built his first lightsaber, he did not follow the usual patterns. He asked for a separate forge, a place beneath the temple where few ventured, a room where stone walls cracked with age and the Force hummed in a lower register. There he crafted something new, a blade not of vibrant hue, but black, a flat, angular flame that bent light and shadow both. It pulsed differently, reacted to emotion. It demanded intention with every swing. He called it nothing. Others named it the Darksaber. When he emerged, blade in hand, some recoiled, others watched in awe. The Council allowed it, though not without hesitation. They sensed balance in him, but also an edge too sharp to dull. Still, he passed his trials, knighted, assigned, trusted, sent into regions others refused. He resolved disputes, led missions, saved lives. His saber sang across a dozen sectors, earning respect even from Jedi who rarely praised. But Tare remained distant, not unkind, not arrogant, just apart. He began spending more time alone, requesting assignments farther from the core, often to worlds once touched by Mandalorians, places the Jedi overlooked, places Tare called wounds. On one such world he disappeared for 6 months. When he returned, he spoke little of what he had seen, but his armor had changed. Beneath the robes he wore Beskar, not as rebellion, but remembrance. It bore no clan sigil, only a single line carved into the chestplate, Cad Solus, blade alone. Some Jedi began to question him openly. "What are you becoming?" asked one master. "What the galaxy needs," Tare replied. He began training others, not many, just a few who had also felt like outsiders. He taught them to listen to their instincts, to question gently, to sharpen without losing their shape. He never taught them how to forge a Darksaber. Only he could bear that burden. Eventually he was summoned before the High Council. Not in reprimand, in respect. A new threat was rising on the mid-rim. The Council asked him to lead a small task force, one that would require diplomacy as much as defense. He accepted. But before he left, he walked to the temple's central archive and placed a data pad on the pedestal. Its contents, records of Mandalorian history, battles, codes, legends. Tare had compiled them during his missions. He'd written them not as a warrior or a Jedi, but as both. When asked why, he said, "So no one forgets who we were, or what we could be." Then he left, cloaked in grey, saber at his side, neither fully Jedi nor wholly Mandalorian. Something in between. Something new. Something the galaxy wasn't ready to understand. Not yet. The forge beneath the Jedi Temple was older than most of the halls above it. Buried beneath polished marble and towering spires, it thrummed with a steady pulse, a place where the air was thick with heat and the silence pressed in close. The walls were unadorned, no murals, no scripture, just stone and fire. Jedi rarely came here unless the time had come to build something new. Tare Vizsla descended alone. No master guided his steps. No council had summoned him. This was not a rite of passage. It was something else. A pull from within that had grown louder with every passing year. He had studied the Jedi, honored their code. He had followed their path through war zones and ruins, across battlefields and peace treaties. And yet, something still remained unresolved. Not broken, unspoken. He stood in silence for hours before beginning. His Kyber crystal, found during a solitary trek through a force-drenched cave in the outer rim, waited on the anvil. It did not glow, it pulsed, slow, deep. Its hue was not the blue of guardians or the green of wisdom. It was something darker, more ancient. The crystal had chosen him, but it was not gentle in doing so. Tare did not fear it. He began his work. The materials he selected were non-traditional, fractured alloys from fallen ships, fragments of Mandalorian plating passed down from forgotten skirmishes, dust from Concordia's surface, even slivers of obsidian glass recovered from a scorched world that no longer bore a name. None of it was typical. All of it was deliberate. He shaped the hilt by hand, etched his clan's ancient phrase on the inside of the emitter casing, hidden from view. Verd Orishia Beskargam. A warrior is more than armor. The construction took 3 days. He spoke to no one, ate little, slept less. When the saber first activated, the room darkened, not from power loss, but from presence. The blade did not shine, it consumed. Its edge glowed faintly, trimmed in white, but the core was flat and black, as if the night itself had been drawn into shape. It crackled, humming not like other lightsabers, but lower, rougher, with a rhythm that sounded almost alive. It resisted his hand for a moment, then settled. It was not an extension of him. It was a counterpart. News spread quickly. Apprentices whispered in the halls. Masters exchanged glances. Few had seen the blade, but all had felt its weight in the Force. Different, not dark, not corrupted, just unaligned. The council summoned Tare, not in judgment but inquiry. They questioned his methods, the crystal's nature, the materials. He answered plainly, with respect, but also with finality. "This is my blade," he said, "not because it is mine, but because it is who I am." They did not forbid its use, but neither did they condone it. From that moment, Tara stood further apart. He was still a Jedi, still followed missions, still upheld the code, but the Darksaber mocked him. In battle, its presence drew attention like a beacon. Enemies paused when they saw it. Allies grew quieter. Other Jedi hesitated beside him, their stances unsure. And yet, he never misused it. He never let its uniqueness become arrogance. He never raised it without cause. But the blade was watching. Its history had not yet begun, but already it whispered through the air. It left impressions in training rooms long after Tara had gone. It hummed faintly even when deactivated, as if remembering the wars it had yet to fight. The archivists debated where to record it. Some argued it belonged in the vaults of special arms. Others wanted it classified. But Tare placed no restrictions on its visibility. He allowed it to be studied, observed, tested. It passed every measurement, defied none of the Order's thresholds. And still, the Council remained wary. One master warned, "This is a blade that defines its wielder, not the other way around." Tara did not disagree. He began wearing the saber openly, on missions, through cities, into negotiations, not as a threat, as truth. When off-world senators asked about it, he would only reply, "It was forged for someone who is not one thing." He did not mean it as a riddle. He meant it as fact. The Darksaber was not a rejection of the Jedi path. It was the part of the path no one else had walked. Not light, not dark, just dusk, waiting for purpose. Tara Vizsla left the Jedi Temple in silence. No announcement, no ceremony, no farewell. He submitted no resignation to the Council. Only a message, brief, formal, unsigned. It contained no bitterness, only a declaration. "The path I was born to follow lies elsewhere. May the Force continue with you." His chambers remained untouched for years. His name was struck from active duty records, but never from the archives. The Darksaber was not reclaimed. He took it with him, not stolen, not hidden, carried openly. He did not flee. He returned to Mandalore. But not the Mandalore of his childhood, the one remembered through firelight and fragmented memory. This Mandalore was fractured. The clans were disunited. Honor had become currency. Tradition twisted by generations of infighting, forged anew by whatever warlord could shout the loudest. No leader held sway over all. No code unified the hearts beneath the armor. They did not expect him. They barely remembered him. Most had never heard of him at all. He came not in a warship, but in a single aging transport. No honor guard, no allies, only his blade. He found his clan scattered. Vizsla's name still carried weight, but no one bore it with clarity. Cousins warred over territory. Elders clung to stories. Warriors claimed legacy, but understood little of what it meant. When Tara revealed himself, some doubted he was truly Vizsla. Others believed, but scorned him for leaving. A Jedi. To them, the word meant exile, outsider, software. They mocked the saber at his side. A torch for storytellers, one challenger called it, until he activated it. The Darksaber spoke before Tara did. Its hum was not loud, but it pulled every eye. The flat, black blade shimmered against the light of Mandalore's twin suns, drawing a silence sharper than any insult. For a moment, it was as if the ground itself paused. He did not strike. He didn't need to. He spoke of the old ways, of the Rezol Nar, the 6 tenets that defined Mandalorian life. He recited them not from memory, but from belief. His voice was steady, not pleading, not forceful. He offered no conquest, only clarity. Few listened. At first, he moved from city to city, settlement to settlement, never stayed long. He fixed what could be fixed, settled disputes others had fueled for decades, sometimes with words, sometimes with steel. His saber was never ornamental, but it was never used without cause. Slowly, warriors began to follow. They didn't understand the Force, and he didn't try to explain it. He taught through action, presence. In battle, he moved like no one they had seen before. His strikes were efficient, his mind unreadable. His posture held calm like it was part of his armor. In the field, he saved lives. In the forge, he taught younglings how to shape metal. He didn't command, he guided, and the saber followed. Those who saw it more than once began to believe it chose him. Not everyone accepted him. Some leaders saw his growing influence and challenged him. Others claimed he had turned his back on true Mandalorian strength. Tara met each one personally, sometimes with conversation, other times in combat. He did not lose, but he always offered mercy. One by one, even the skeptics began to recognize the truth. Tara was not trying to rule. He was trying to unite. The Jedi, far away, watched. They sent no retrieval team. But they debated, long, quietly, in circles. Some saw his actions as defiance. Others argued he had found a place where peace and strength could coexist. A few feared what would happen if the Darksaber fell into unworthy hands. In the end, they chose to allow it. Barely. The Republic asked no questions. Tara posed no threat to their order, and Mandalore was, as always, just far enough from their interests to ignore. Tara eventually returned to his ancestral home, an old fortress buried in the stone of a crater wall. He reforged it, not as a palace, but as a hall. Open, shared, warriors, smiths, children, and exiles all found space there. Above its entrance he carved no emblem. Just one phrase, etched in raw Mandoa: Ni suchuyi, gar kir adik, ni partaili, gar darasum. I'm still alive. You are dead. I remember you, so you live forever. And above that, embedded in the stone, was a torch bracket. The Darksaber rested there when not in battle. Not a weapon, a symbol, a reminder of what had been lost and what might still be reclaimed. Tara unites fractious clans with wisdom, not fire. But he is still a warrior. He leads battles that end swiftly, decisively. The Darksaber becomes a symbol of Mandalore's divine right. Whispers begin that the blade listens. The clans had never been ruled, only led, and only briefly. What passed for unity among Mandalorians often came from shared enemies, not shared vision. Alliances were temporary, loyalties conditional. But Tara Vizsla didn't bring fire. He brought quiet. He didn't command the clans through fear. He didn't bribe them with territory. He arrived at each stronghold with no escort, only his saber and his silence. He listened before he spoke. He observed long before he acted. And when he did speak, it wasn't in rallying cries or doctrine. It was in truths few wanted to say aloud. You fight one another because it's easier than facing what's gone. They called him outsider, Jedi, pretender, but the insults didn't hold. Not once they saw what he did. In the southern deserts of Runar, he ended a blood feud 3 generations deep by offering both sides a new forge, built from materials scavenged during one of his earliest battles. You both broke each other, he said. You may as well rebuild together. In the polar reaches of Jebur, he challenged a warlord in single combat. The terms were simple: no armor, no force, no saber, just hands and instinct. He didn't win by strength. He won by letting the other man exhaust himself. When the warlord collapsed, Tare carried him back into the hall himself. He earned not submission, but respect. Still, there were battles. When needed, he led without hesitation. He didn't revel in war, but he understood its rhythm. And when the clans followed him into the field, they returned stunned, not by his power, but his clarity. He never shouted, never panicked. He gave few orders, but each one struck like a vibro blade to the heart of the enemy. His victories were swift, decisive, surgical, and always the Darksaber led the charge. It moved like no other weapon, not just through flesh and steel, but through memory. Enemies who had once mocked it faltered at its sound. Mandalorians who doubted Tare's claim to legacy began to murmur that the blade wasn't just his to wield. It had chosen him. And soon, those whispers deepened. Some began to say the saber had moods, that it hummed differently depending on its wielder's conviction, that it grew heavier in the hands of cowards, that when Tare was at peace, the blade was still. But when he doubted, when his thoughts strayed from the path, it sparked unpredictably, like a flame biting its own wick. They called it superstition, and yet no one else dared to wield it. Tare did not encourage the myths. He never claimed the blade spoke. He never claimed it granted authority, but he did not deny what it represented. He stood in front of the united clans of Mandalore and made no apology for where he'd come from. I am not only Mandalorian, I am not only Jedi, I am what we might become. Not everyone knelt, but enough did. The title of Mandalore had lain dormant for decades, used sparingly, claimed often, honored rarely. Tare accepted it with no ceremony, no coronation. He merely stood, saber lit, in the Hall of Iron Flame as the clans bore witness. From that day, the Darksaber was no longer a curiosity. It was symbol, standard, flame and shadow bound into form. It was placed in his throne's mantle when he wasn't carrying it, not as an ornament, as a promise. And it was said that when someone entered the hall with ill intent, the saber flickered just once. Tare's reign did not last forever, but during its height, Mandalore saw a kind of unity it hadn't known since myth. Not imposed, not enforced, chosen. He ruled without building an empire. He ruled by reminding his people who they had once been, and what they could be again. And always, at his side, the Darksaber. Waiting, watching, listening. Tare Vizsla did not die in battle. No blade found his heart. No poison reached his cup. No enemy outmatched him beneath twin suns. He died as he lived, deliberate, silent, unshaken. Alone in the solar chamber of his mountain keep, beneath a stained glass ceiling that caught Mandalore's dusk and scattered it across stone walls. He left no final words, no edict, no farewell. When his attendants entered the chamber the next morning, they found him seated cross-legged, eyes closed, one hand resting on the hilt of the Darksaber, not gripping it, just touching, as if he'd been mid-thought and followed it all the way into whatever came next. His body was untouched by time or illness. There was no sign of distress, no violence, only stillness. The clans gathered within hours. Even those who had once defied his rule stood in solemn lines along the fortress corridors. His armor was placed on a pyre carved from beskar and ironwood, but the Darksaber was not burned with him. It was missing, taken quietly in the hours between death and ceremony. No Mandalorian had touched it. No one had seen it leave. But when the sun set, word came from the core. The Jedi had it. A delegation from the temple had arrived days earlier under the guise of diplomatic mourning. They paid their respects, offered quiet prayers, walked the halls of Tara's keep with hands folded behind their backs, and when they left, the saber was gone. They called it preservation, custodianship. They claimed Tari's connection to the Order gave them the right to protect what he left behind. It is a unique construct, the High Council wrote, one that holds power beyond any single lineage. Mandalore saw it differently. To the clans, it was theft. There was no war, not then. But the fury cracked beneath every breath. They sent emissaries, unarmed, official, demanding the saber's return. The Jedi offered meetings, discussions, never action. The saber, they said, was safe, preserved, studied, not displayed. It remained within the temple's vault of relics, guarded, shielded, contained. They didn't understand what it meant. To Mandalorians, it wasn't a weapon. It was a symbol of unity, hard-earned, a proof that their creed and the galaxy's greatest tradition of order could meet in one soul. Tara had not just carried the Darksaber. He had forged it from what the galaxy told him could not be merged. It wasn't a Jedi relic. It was Mandalore's heart, cooled into steel, and now it was locked behind durasteel and silence. There were whispers of a raid, plans drawn in the dark, strike teams of elite clans, cloaked dropships, hidden corridors beneath Coruscant. But the Jedi Temple was no fortress of fools. It bristled with old defenses and newer ones unknown to even the Republic. And worse, a direct assault would fracture Mandalorian unity before it ever touched Jedi stone. So they waited. The Darksaber did not. It remained behind glass, suspended in a containment field that nullified energy discharge. Scholars documented its shape, catalogued its hum, analyzed the peculiar angular blade that defied typical kyber behavior. The saber pulsed when activated, not just with light, but with resistance. It did not respond as others did. When touched by Jedi hands, it felt heavier, slower, as though it questioned their right to hold it. Some claimed it flickered when certain names were spoken. Others said the hilt grew colder if you approached with arrogance. Most dismissed these as myth, projection. A saber, after all, is just a tool. But the Jedi had already lost the understanding Tara had built it upon. And so the Darksaber slept. Generations passed. Clans rose and fell. Mandalore's political core shifted, fractured, healed, fractured again. The saber did not return, but neither did it vanish from thought. Its name remained whispered in trials, painted in murals, traced in scars. Children asked where it had gone. Elders told them quietly, "It watches, behind glass, waiting for someone worthy." No Jedi carried it again. Not truly. They feared it without saying so. Not because it was dark, but because it refused to bow. And somewhere beneath the temple, encased in light meant to contain it, the Darksaber hummed, low, patient, Not forgotten, just waiting. The Jedi thought the Darksaber forgotten, locked beneath layers of protocol, protected by durasteel, hidden behind time. But Clan Vizsla had never stopped watching. They knew the temple's rotation schedules, knew the corridors where light sensors faltered for half seconds, knew which ventilation shafts hadn't been reinforced since the last reconstruction. The heist wasn't planned in weeks or months. It took decades. Whispers passed across generations, maps etched in armor plating, corridors memorized by descendants who had never even set foot on Coruscant. And when they struck, it wasn't an army, just three. Three members of the Vizsla line. No call signs, no code transmissions, no digital footprints. They landed under false diplomatic clearance, slipped into the underlevels during a festival week, and moved beneath the temple like wind beneath a sealed door. They didn't fire a shot. They didn't need to. The relic vault was deep, shielded, patrolled, watched by both Tech and Jedi. But the Darksaber wasn't behind the innermost doors. It didn't glow with dark energy or trigger alarms. It rested in a transparent containment case, unlit, dormant, waiting. It hadn't been touched in nearly 80 years. And yet when the Vizsla infiltrators approached, it hummed faintly, just once. The oldest among them paused. They didn't speak, didn't reach with reverence. They opened the case with precision. The saber rose from its cradle without resistance. No alert sounded, but the Jedi felt it. One master, deep in meditation above the vault, opened his eyes with a sharp breath. Something has left. By then, it was already gone. The escape was methodical. They left behind no damage, no bodies, only a symbol etched into the case where the Darksaber had rested. The crest of House Vizsla, old, sharp, and unmistakable. The Council's response was subdued, official, composed. They released no statement, no pursuit team, but their silence wasn't mercy. It was uncertainty. Publicly reclaiming the saber might ignite a war, and privately, some among the Order were beginning to question whether they had ever been meant to hold it. Clan Vizsla, on the other hand, did not hide what had been done. They brought the saber back to Mandalore not as trophy, but as truth. It was carried through the streets of Kelday by torchlight, never activated, but held high. For many, it was the first time they had seen it outside of legend. The weight in the air shifted. Old songs were sung. The forge masters struck anvils in rhythm with the saber's silent beat. It had returned, but so had the question, who would wield it? The eldest of the infiltrators refused it. "It is not for thieves," he said. "It must be earned." And that opened the door. Dueling returned, not for territory, but for legacy. Warriors across clans came forward, declaring heritage, right, strength. Some sought to claim the saber through challenge. Others bowed before it, offering fealty to whomever proved worthy. The Darksaber had not asked for a master, but it had drawn attention. The first duel ended in silence. Two warriors. One fell. The other reached for the hilt, and it burned him. Not with fire, with rejection. The blade refused to ignite. He tried again. Nothing. He left the chamber, head bowed. Others followed. Slowly, one by one, champions came. Not all survived. Those who disrespected the saber, those who treated it like a symbol of conquest rather than memory, left with wounds or not at all. The saber never spoke, but it never had to. Eventually, it found a hand. A warrior who said nothing when they entered, who didn't draw a weapon, who placed their hand on the hilt and waited. The Darksaber activated before they moved. It hummed low, even, steady, and the room fell quiet. That wielder would be the first in generations to carry the Darksaber into the Great Hall. They lit it before the clans, not in threat, but recognition. It wasn't a coronation, it wasn't declared, but it was understood. Yet even as the saber returned home, the galaxy turned. Whispers of the heist reached far corners. Not all viewed the act with reverence. Some called it desecration, theft of a relic once gifted by the Jedi to peace. Others feared what it meant, that Mandalore was waking again. And war always followed when the Darksaber was seen. It hadn't drawn blood yet, but it remembered how. The Darksaber had returned, and with it came a truth too heavy to silence. Whoever held it could claim the throne of Mandalore. Not through bloodline, not through decree, through challenge. It was not a law. It was not written into edicts or etched in stone. It was belief, unshakable, wordless, passed from mouth to mouth like a quiet fire. The clans accepted it not because they were told, but because they had seen it work. One blade, one bearer, one rule. But the blade did not yield easily. The warrior who first reclaimed it from the temple never called themselves ruler. They wore the saber with discipline, led with humility, and hoped peace might follow. But peace did not come. Mandalore had never been a land of silence. It pulsed with honor debts, old rivalries, buried lines of succession. And when the Darksaber gleamed above the great hall, challenges came like rain to parched stone. The rules were simple. Speak your name, step forward, face the blade. Victory granted power. Defeat meant death or exile. Some fought for ambition, others for vengeance. A few simply wanted to test the edge of history. The first challenger was a brother to the bearer. The second, a cousin. The third, a warrior who had once trained under the same master, long before either held rank. The fights were brutal, clean, no poison, no tricks. The Darksaber cut through Beskar like it remembered how. It hissed in each duel, burning through air and flesh alike. It didn't favor its wielder. It demanded they prove themselves, again and again and again. Mandalorians watched in silence, not with horror, with understanding. This was not cruelty. This was right. To lead, one must be ready to be bled. And still, the challenges kept coming. In the eastern strongholds, a woman named Kirana Vesh took her sister's life on the dueling floor. The crowd did not cheer. They bowed their heads. When she lifted the Darksaber, it flared brighter than it had in decades. For a moment it seemed to sing. Under her reign, the clans knew a strange balance. Trade resumed. Outposts were fortified. The warrior academies were rebuilt. But even in peace, the saber hung above the throne, not as ornament, but warning. No ruler held it long, not because they were weak, because the blade made them visible. It elevated them, then painted a target. And the stronger the leader, the stronger the challenger. The Darksaber fed cycles of ambition like roots drinking from ancient blood. Children trained with eyes on it. Elders whispered of battles past. For many, the saber became more than symbol. It was Mandalore itself, reduced to metal and shaped by will. But something else stirred beneath the tradition. A shift. Not all duels were born from honor. Some bore the rot of politics, whispered betrayal, quiet poisonings followed by open challenge. The blade accepted victory, but it never clarified motive. It did not judge, only acknowledged. And slowly, the meaning began to blur. The Darksaber had once been a bridge between Jedi and Mandalorian, between shadow and light. But in the arena, that history faded. It became a ladder, a throne key, a crown with an edge, and with each duel, the blade gleamed brighter. Some said it was drawing from the blood spilled in its name. Others claimed it resonated with the will of Mandalore itself, glowing hotter when leadership was true. No one could prove either. But none doubted the pattern. It never dulled. Even after decades, even after dozens of wielders, it always returned to the hall, passed from victor to victor, never stolen, always earned. But each time it changed hands, it remembered. And though it made no sound but the hiss of plasma and the hum of power, it watched. The galaxy turned, but the Jedi no longer turned with it. Their order had thinned, some said with age, others with war. Councils once filled with voices now echoed. Holocrons went unconsulted. Some temples stood in ruin, others stood quiet. The Jedi did not vanish, but they no longer walked among stars with the same authority. They watched instead, from distant moons, from lost archives, from shadowed enclaves built deep within forgotten systems. A few survivors remembered the Darksaber, knew its history not from legend, but from presence. They had seen it hum behind glass, had read the energy it emitted when anger walked near. Now they watched it move from hand to hand in Mandalore's high halls. They read reports, saw scattered footage, listened to intercepted transmissions, and what they saw disturbed them, not because of the blood, but because of the weight. One called it a wound-turned weapon. Another wrote, "The blade does not choose. It waits, but it waits with hunger." A third simply warned, "It amplifies what you bring to it." These warnings never reached far. The Jedi were no longer heard, and the Mandalorians would not have listened even if they had been. To the clans, the blade was sacred, a test, a torch passed between those brave enough to burn for something greater. Every drop of blood spilled in the dueling ring added meaning to the metal. Every scar earned beneath the blade added another line to the story. They honored the dead, carved their names into iron pillars, drank to their memory. But some deaths were slower. Some wielders won the blade but never truly carried it. One ruled for 6 years, undefeated, uncontested, until their hands began to shake when igniting the saber. No doctor could explain it. They grew paranoid, then silent. They stopped speaking in public, stopped eating with others. The saber grew hot in their grasp, until one night it refused to ignite at all. They vanished. The next morning, the blade was found beside their helmet. No blood, no sign of struggle, just absence. Another tried to reforge the Darksaber, believing that by reforging its casing, they could modernize Mandalore's path. The forge exploded. No one else tried. And still, the challenges came. Warriors traveled days across shattered landscapes just to kneel before it. Some didn't even reach the chamber. They died outside, blades still sheathed, felled by others who wanted the chance first. The blade did not change, but those who held it began to. Some became distant, others cruel. Many led with fire, claiming it was the only way to be heard. A few ruled with grace, but always with the flicker of dread behind their eyes, because they knew. One misstep, one moment of doubt, and someone would rise against them, and the blade would not intervene. It did not care for balance. It did not whisper of right or wrong. It hummed when lifted in challenge and grew cold when cast aside. One Jedi, exiled, nameless, watching from the edge of the core, spoke to a student in hushed tones. Vizsla made it as a bridge, but bridges, when untended, become battlegrounds. And that was what the Darksaber had become, a throne in metal. A question asked with every draw. Do you deserve me? Many said yes. Few ever proved it. The saber gleamed through it all, not with pride, not with purpose, just with presence. It burned brighter after every duel, as if it remembered, as if it absorbed the clarity of victory, and the confusion left behind. And still, the Jedi watched, not to retrieve it. Not anymore. That time had passed. They watched to see who would last long enough to understand what they were truly holding. Not just a weapon, but a mirror. And some, when they looked into it, saw only fire. The blade passes hands unseen. Through shadows, through betrayal, through reluctant champions. One ruler throws it away, another hunts it for decades. It disappears, then resurfaces. Every reappearance rewrites the future of Mandalore. Every disappearance makes its myth grow louder. No throne stays unchallenged. No legacy remains undisturbed. Long after Vizsla's flame dimmed, long after the Darksaber had carved its path through warlords and prophets, a quieter kind of war began. It was not marked by armies, not fought in open fields. There were no war drums, no clan banners rippling over blood-soaked ground. This war whispered through the halls of strongholds, behind doors bolted in silence. It passed from hand to hand without ceremony. A blade forged to speak loudly now slipped like a ghost between shadows. It began with an heir, a ruler who wore the Darksaber but did not want it. Her name is lost, buried in a vault that collapsed with the city she once governed. She held the blade for 3 years and spoke of it only once. "It's not a crown," she said. "It's a curse with a handle." She ruled well, fairly, but she felt the hum of the blade beneath her skin. Not dark, not evil, just constant. It was like holding an unsleeping eye, always watching, always weighing. So one night, beneath the red moon of Braylor, she walked into the desert and threw the Darksaber into the chasm beyond the fire ridges. She told no one. The next morning, she stood before her council and abdicated. She was never seen again. The clans were stunned. Some believed she still carried the saber in secret. Others claimed the Jedi had retrieved it in the night. Conspiracies flourished. Challenges were issued in vain. Without the blade, no duel could claim Mandalore. And so Mandalore fell into pause. Not peace, just hesitation. Years passed. Then, without warning, it returned. No warning, no herald. A low-born mercenary walked into the High Court of Kalevala with the Darksaber hanging from their belt like scrap metal. They said little, only that they'd found it buried in obsidian dust beneath the wreck of an old crawler. They hadn't meant to keep it, but it lit in their hand. Some knelt, others mocked, but none stepped forward to challenge. Not at first. The mercenary ruled for 7 months, not through wisdom, not through strength, through the inertia of legend. The blade had chosen again, or so many thought. They died in silence, cut down one by one in the chamber of fire duels. The mercenary grew cold, detached. Power warped them not outward, but inward. When they disappeared, no one searched. The Darksaber vanished with them. What followed were decades of silence broken only by rumor. A spice runner claimed to have seen it in the hands of a war orphan in the lower sectors of Sundari. Traded for food, unused, unrecognized. Another story placed it in the auction halls of Nar Shaddaa, bound in energy locks and mislabeled as ancient Jedi tech. A third said it had been taken off-world entirely, sold to a collector who never knew what he held, who stored it in a vault beside old blasters and broken protocol droids. None of the tales were confirmed. All were believed. Mandalore remained fractured. The clans moved like tides, colliding, receding, shifting allegiances with each season. Without the Darksaber, no ruler could hold their claim. Without the Darksaber, every victory felt temporary. And yet, the myth of the blade only grew. Children whispered of it during trials. Veterans spoke of its weight with reverence, even if they'd never seen it. Forge masters cast imitations, black glass blades built to inspire, but they hummed with emptiness. No true light, no true call. Then came the one who searched. A warlord from the outer reaches, not born of a great clan, not raised in halls of steel. He heard the stories and believed them, not as truth, but as compass. His campaigns spanned decades, not of conquest, but inquiry. He hunted ruins, sifted wreckage, questioned survivors, traveled systems long since marked forbidden. His face changed with time, his voice roughened, his armor blackened piece by piece, with ash and oil and time. He was not kind, but he was focused, and he found it. On a dead moon orbiting a dead star, deep in the remains of a pirate vault, long collapsed by seismic instability. He dug through caved-in halls, walked through rooms where oxygen had long since fled, and there, in the cold black silence, it waited. The Darksaber. It did not ignite at first. He knelt beside it, spoke no words, waited. Then slowly, it answered, with a hum like memory surfacing from centuries below. He returned to Mandalore, not with an army, but with a presence. The clans stirred. The old ones recognized the pulse. The young ones felt the shift in the force, though they didn't know to name it. The saber had returned, not gifted, not claimed, witnessed. He lit it before the gathered clans, said nothing, then placed it on the stone altar beneath the old temple gates. Whoever can lift it, he said, must live with it. He did not draw it again. Some tried. Many failed. One lifted it with ease, only to fall to madness weeks later. Another bore it for 2 years, never speaking its name, never answering its call. When she died in battle, the saber was taken by scavengers and vanished once more. Thus continued the quiet war. Heirs born of bloodlines, of battles, of myth, chasing a blade that cared for none of them. The Darksaber passed through traitors and saints, fools and legends. It answered to none the same way twice, and every time it was lost, Mandalore paused, not in grief, in breath. Because every reappearance rewrote what came after. Every disappearance etched deeper into what could never be undone. The Darksaber was no longer just history. It was the future, refusing to be predicted. And somewhere, perhaps in a forge, perhaps in a vault, perhaps in the hands of a child who does not yet know its weight, it waits.